Today about the family of Oscar-winning actress Julia Roberts. Her half-sister Nancy Moats died on Sunday after an apparent drug overdose in her home in Los Angeles. The family released a statement today confirming the news, adding that the family is both shocked and devastated.
For more than 30 years, Julia Roberts has had one of the most recognizable smiles in the world. It sold movie tickets by the hundreds of millions. It made her the highest-paid actress on the planet. It turned her into the kind of star people just called America's sweetheart, as if the nickname explained everything about her. But a nickname like that only ever tells you what the audience saw from the outside. It doesn't tell you what a person was carrying while they smiled. And when you actually sit with the timeline of Julia Roberts' life, not the highlight reel, but the years in between the highlight reel, you find a woman who buried her father as a child, survived one of the most humiliating breakups in the history of celebrity gossip, lost a half-sister to a death that came with a note blaming her family by name, and then lost her mother almost exactly a year later. All of it happened while the cameras kept rolling, and the world kept asking her to be charming on command. This is the story of what that actually cost her. Julia Fiona Roberts was born on October 28, 1967, in Smyrna, Georgia, the youngest daughter of Walter Grady Roberts and Betty Lou Berdemus. Her parents were both actors and acting teachers who had met performing together for the armed forces and married in the mid-1950s. Together they ran the Actors and Writers Workshop in Atlanta, a small theater school where they taught children how to perform. One of their students was Yolanda King, the daughter of Martin Luther King Jr. and Coretta Scott King, a detail that says something about the world Julia grew up watching from the sidelines, a house full of rehearsal and craft before she was old enough to understand what any of it meant. That world, though, was not a stable one. Her parents' marriage came apart in the early 1970s, when Julia was still a small child, and the workshop that had defined their life together folded under financial strain around the same time. It was the kind of divorce that quietly reorganizes a household. New addresses, new routines, a family split into pieces that used to be one thing. Then came the loss that really shaped her. Her father, Walter, was diagnosed with throat cancer in the mid-1970s. He underwent surgery and radiation, but the disease continued to progress, and he died in 1977 at the age of 44. Julia was 10 years old. She has said in later interviews that she wishes she'd had more time to actually know him as an adult would, to ask him things, to understand who he was outside the role of father. Losing a parent at 10 doesn't announce itself as a wound the way a broken bone does. It just sits there quietly under everything that comes after, shaping decisions and instincts in ways a person doesn't always notice happening. She has spoken about inheriting things from him anyway, a sense of humor, a love of storytelling, the pull toward performance that eventually became her career. When she won her Academy Award decades later, she dedicated it, in part, to his memory. By the late 1980s, the girl from the broken-apart acting school in Atlanta was becoming one of the most talked-about young actresses in America. Mystic Pizza, in 1988, introduced her to audiences. Steel Magnolias, in 1989, earned her an Academy Award nomination for Best Supporting Actress before she'd even turned 23. Critics and audiences kept noticing the same thing about her on screen, a warmth that read as completely unguarded, like she was actually feeling every beat of a scene instead of performing it. Then, in 1990, Pretty Woman happened, and nothing about her life was ever the same size again. The romantic comedy became the highest-grossing film of that year, pulling in several $100 million worldwide against a budget of just $14 million. Julia Roberts went from promising young actress to the most famous woman in movies in the span of a single summer. The films that followed through the 90s, Sleeping with the Enemy, My Best Friend's Wedding, Notting Hill, Runaway Bride, kept that momentum going, each one leaning on the same quality audiences had responded to from the start. She made people feel like they were being let in on something real, not sold something manufactured. What most of the audience didn't see, because it wasn't the kind of thing that made it onto a movie poster, was how disorienting that level of fame actually was to live inside. She was in her early 20s, newly one of the most photographed people alive, and every part of her personal life had suddenly become public property. In 1991, Roberts was engaged to actor Kiefer Sutherland, her co-star from the film Flatliners. Entertainment reporters at the time treated the two of them as Hollywood's golden couple, and the wedding, planned for a soundstage at 20th Century Fox, decorated to look like a garden, was covered as a celebrity event of the year before it even happened. 3 days before the ceremony, Roberts called it off. Reports from the time pointed to Sutherland having grown close to another woman while the wedding was being planned. And rather than go through with it, Roberts pulled out at the last possible moment, then left the country for a while with a friend as the story exploded across every tabloid in America. It was a very public, very humiliating way for a relationship to end, and she had to process it while photographers were actively hunting for her reaction. She eventually found something steadier. In 2002, she married cinematographer Danny Moder, someone she met on a film set, and who had no real interest in the entertainment industry spotlight that had swallowed her earlier relationships. The marriage has lasted more than 2 decades. They have 3 children together, twins Hazel and Phineas, born in 2004, and son Henry, born in 2007, and Roberts has been notably protective of keeping that part of her life out of public view, a deliberate contrast to how her 20s had played out. That stability, though, didn't insulate her from what was coming. In February 2014, Roberts' half-sister, Nancy Motes, was found dead in Los Angeles. She was 37. The cause of death was later determined to be a drug overdose, and it was reported to have been ruled a suicide. Nancy and Julia shared the same mother, Betty Lou, but had different fathers, and Nancy had spent years working as a production assistant in the industry her famous half-sister towered over, without her own career ever gaining traction the same way. Family members and reports at the time described the relationship between the two women as long-strained, weighed down by the specific difficulty of being related to someone that famous without ever being seen the same way yourself. Nancy reportedly left behind a note at the time of her death, and multiple outlets reported that it expressed deep pain and placed blame on her family for the difficulty of her life. Whatever was actually written, and whatever the full context behind it was, is something only the people closest to that situation can speak to with any real authority. Grief and addiction distort a person's sense of their own relationships in ways that are painful and complicated to untangle from any distance. What's not in dispute is that Roberts had to absorb that loss in the most public way imaginable, with entertainment reporters immediately asking questions before she'd had any time to grieve privately. 20 days after her sister's death, Roberts sat for a previously scheduled interview with Wall Street Journal magazine. Asked about the loss, she visibly teared up and told the interviewer it was just heartbreak, adding that there weren't words yet to explain what the family had been through, that some days it was simply a matter of getting through hour by hour while trying to keep looking forward. It was a brief, guarded response to an enormous loss, delivered in front of journalists because the calendar had already scheduled the conversation before anyone knew grief would be sitting in the room too. Her mother, Betty Lou, reportedly moved in with Roberts and her family in the aftermath, the household pulling inward the way families sometimes do after a loss that doesn't have a clean explanation attached to it. Roberts had barely had a year to absorb her sister's death when the family was hit again. Betty Lou Demas had been diagnosed with lung cancer in 2013, around the same period Nancy Motes had been struggling, meaning the family had effectively been carrying 2 crises at once without much space between them. Betty Lou spent her final months living with Julia's family in Malibu rather than in a care facility, a decision that put her in daily contact with her daughter, son-in-law, and grandchildren to the end of her life. On February 19, 2015, 5 days before that year's Academy Award ceremony, Betty Lou died at the age of 80. Roberts did not attend the Oscars that year, losing a parent almost exactly 12 months after losing a sibling to a death that had come a note assigning blame to the family is the kind of compounded grief that doesn't resolve into anything tidy. There's no framework that makes 2 losses like that make sense together. In an Instagram post around what would have been her mother's birthday, Roberts later shared a photo of herself wearing a bracelet engraved with a single word, Betty. It's worth remembering in the middle of all this that Roberts wasn't just enduring loss during these years. She was simultaneously one of the most successful actresses alive. In 2000, she won the Academy Award for Best Actress for playing real-life environmental activist Erin Brockovich, a performance that required her to shed the romantic comedy warmth that had defined her early career in favor of something rougher and more specific. The film made over $250 million worldwide. That same period, She became the first actress in Hollywood history to command a $20 million salary for a film, a number that reset what was considered possible for a woman's earning power in an industry that had always been built around men at the top of the call sheet. The years afterward brought an ensemble turn in Ocean's 11, a morally complicated role in Closer, a sharp genre performance in Duplicity, the choices of someone who had already proven what she could do commercially and was now interested in proving something else entirely. Later in that decade, as some of her films underperformed against expectations, entertainment trade press occasionally floated the question of whether her box office pull was fading. She kept working anyway, on projects that interested her rather than ones designed purely to chase the audience that had loved her at 23. None of that success, though. The Oscar, the record-setting paycheck, the 2 decades of stardom, changed what was happening in her family during the exact same stretch of years. Money and fame are very good at solving certain kind of problems. They are not able to touch grief. Julia Roberts turned 58 in October 2025. She's been married to Danny Moder for more than 20 years. Her twins are adults now, and her youngest, Henry, is a teenager. By most accounts, the life she's built for herself is deliberately quiet. She's talked in interviews about the specific relief of doing things that require no performance at all, no awareness of being watched, after a career built almost entirely on being looked at. The losses she's carried don't go away because time passes. The father she lost at 10. The half-sister whose death came wrapped in language that blamed her by name. The mother who died 14 months after that. Following months of living under the same roof as her daughter, watching illness take its course in real time. Those things don't stop belonging to a person just because the cameras have moved on to someone else's story. What seems to have changed with time isn't the weight of any of it. It's her relationship to that weight. The raw, visibly unprocessed grief of the 2014 interview, where a journalist could watch her face tighten in real time, has given way over the following decade to something quieter. A bracelet with name engraved on it. A birthday post with no elaboration attached. That's not someone burying the feeling. It's closer to what grief looks like once a person has lived with it long enough that it no longer needs a lot of words to explain itself. Her children were old enough, by the time Betty Lou died, to understand that something serious was happening in their house. Roberts has spoken warmly about her mother as the person who taught her almost everything she knows about parenting, someone who raised 3 kids largely on her own without ever making the difficulty of it visible to them. Someone who could deflect a hard question about single parenthood with pure dry wit rather than self-pity. That inheritance, by every account, is still present in how Roberts talks about her own family now. So is the fact that she misses her. There's a reason the phrase America's sweetheart attached itself to Julia Roberts and never really let go. Even decades into her career, it was never just the smile. It was that the smile always seemed to exist alongside something else, an awareness underneath it, that life is genuinely hard, and a choice to keep showing up anyway. That kind of lightness isn't the same thing as an easy life. It's closer to a decision, repeated over and over, to keep going regardless of what the year has handed you. The story of Julia Roberts at 58 isn't a scandal, and it isn't a single tragic event you can point to and say, that's the moment everything changed. It's an accumulation, a childhood cut short by loss, a young adulthood interrupted by public humiliation, a family blindsided twice in barely more than a year, and a career successful enough to make all of it look, from a distance, like nothing had ever gone wrong at all. It had. She just kept working through it, in front of an audience that mostly never knew.